My daughter-in-law donated my entire life's work to Goodwill for a $25 tax receipt. She didn't ask. She thought she was clearing out junk while I recovered from knee surgery. She had no idea she was throwing away $200,000 in custom-made collectibles, tools I'd spent 40 years building by hand. I'm Walter Kessler. I spent 41 years as a master machinist, and my workshop wasn't a garage full of old wrenches. It was an archive. Every calibrated gauge, every hand-tooled brass plane was a piece of mechanical art. Their value wasn't just in the metal. It was in the thousands of hours of my life they represented. And while I was laid up helpless, that entire legacy was boxed up and given away in a single afternoon. This is how an act of so-called help became a $200,000 betrayal. I retired 3 years ago at 62. My wife, Elena, had passed from cancer 2 years before that, and the big house in Dayton, Ohio felt like an echo chamber. The workshop out back became my sanctuary. It's where I went to remember who I was before I was a widower. A machinist's skill is in his hands, but his legacy is in his tools. Mine weren't from a hardware store. Over 4 decades, I made them, modified them, or hunted down specific vintage pieces at trade shows and estate sales. I had a set of 6 English-made Moore and Wright micrometers from the 1950s, still in their original felt-lined case. Each one could measure down to 1/10,000th of an inch. To a collector, that set alone is worth over $4,000. I had a Gerstner International Oak tool chest, number 217 of a limited run from 1988. The felt was worn in the shapes of my most used tools. That chest, empty, fetches over $2,000 at auction. But the crown jewels were the pieces I built myself. A sine bar for precision angle setting, machined from a single block of stainless steel, with ceramic inserts I'd ground by hand. A custom boring head for a milling machine, with adjustments so fine you could dial in a cut thinner than a human hair. These weren't just tools. They were solutions to problems most people never knew existed. They were my fingerprints in metal. My son Jason is 36. He's an accountant. A good man, practical, but he never had the feel for the workshop. To him, it was Dad's dusty hobby den. He'd look at a hand-scraped surface plate and see a heavy slab of iron. He couldn't see the 100 hours of work to make it perfectly, impossibly flat. He married Chloe about 4 years ago. She's a real estate agent. Bubbly, always in motion, with a philosophy that clutter is the enemy of a happy home. I could see her mentally redecorating my house from the first time she walked in. The knee had been bad for years, years of standing on concrete shop floors. The surgeon told me the replacement was textbook, but the recovery would be brutal. 8 weeks minimum before I could put full weight on it. Jason and Chloe offered to help. Chloe, especially, was insistent. "Walter, you can't be alone in that big house trying to hobble around. We'll set up the guest room. We'll handle everything." It sounded like kindness. It felt like a lifeline. I came home from the hospital on a Thursday, foggy from painkillers, my leg in a monstrous brace. Chloe had been over. The guest room was made up. There were casseroles in the freezer, and she'd made a comment almost offhand as she was leaving. "Don't you worry about a thing, Walter. We're going to get that big old workshop of yours tidied up too. One less thing for you to stress about." I was too tired, too drugged to process it as a warning. I just mumbled a thank you. The first 2 weeks are a blur of pain and frustration. The physical therapist came 3 times a week. I was supposed to do exercises that felt like torture. Chloe and Jason would pop in, bring groceries, take out the trash. Chloe started making more comments. "That workshop is such a fire hazard, Walter. All that oil and old wood." Or, "We could really make that space into a nice home gym or an office for you once you're back on your feet." I just shake my head. "Everything in there has its place, Chloe." Then one afternoon, Jason came over alone. He sat on the edge of the guest bed, not quite looking at me. "Dad, I need to talk to you about something. Chloe, she's got it in her head that the workshop is a problem. She's worried about you trying to go out there before you're ready and hurting yourself. She's talking about clearing it out, as a surprise for you, to help." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. Jason, you listen to me. Nothing in that workshop gets moved. Not a single screwdriver. Do you understand? It is not clutter. It is not junk. It is my life's work. He held up his hands. I know, Dad, I know. I told her that, but she's got this idea that it's for your own good. She says you're emotionally attached to obsolete things and that a fresh start would be healthy. I could barely speak. You tell her no, Jason. This is my house, my property. You tell her no. He promised he would. He looked like he meant it, but he also had the weary look of a man who had lost an argument before it even started. A week passed. I was getting a little more mobile, able to hobble to the bathroom on my own. The pain was receding, replaced by a grinding anxiety. I hadn't seen the workshop in over 3 weeks. I asked Jason to wheel me to the back window so I could just look at it. The door was closed. Everything looked normal. I started to relax. Maybe he'd gotten through to her. I was wrong. The following Tuesday, Chloe arrived full of cheerful energy. Big day today, Walter. I've got a charity pickup scheduled. They take furniture, boxes, all sorts of stuff. We're going to finally liberate that back room. My blood went cold. Chloe, no, we talked about this. Jason talked to you. She waved a hand, smiling. Oh, don't you worry about a thing. You just rest. This is my project. You'll thank me later. I tried to get out of bed. My legs, stiff and painful, betrayed me. I was trapped. Chloe, you are not to go into that workshop. That is an order. Do you hear me? Her smile didn't falter, but it tightened at the edges. Walter, you're not thinking clearly. The medication, the stress, it's not good for you to hold on to all that old stuff. It's holding you back. We're doing this for you. I demanded my phone. I called Jason. It went straight to voicemail. I called again and again. Nothing. I could hear Chloe outside on the phone directing someone. I heard the rumble of a large truck backing into the driveway. Helplessness is a quiet, screaming panic. I managed to get to the crutches by the bed. Every movement was fire. I crutched my way to the living room window, my heart hammering against my ribs, and I watched. I watched a two-man crew, hired by Chloe, walk into my workshop. I watched them carry out my Gerstner chest, not with care, but like it was a box of old magazines. I saw one of them stumble, and the corner of the chest cracked against the doorframe. I saw them loading my vices, my toolboxes, canvas bags full of precision instruments, into the back of a plain white box truck. Piece by piece, 41 years of my hands, my mind, my history, vanished into that dark cargo hold. Chloe stood on the driveway with a clipboard checking things off. She looked pleased, efficient. The entire process took less than 2 hours. When the truck pulled away, the workshop door was left open. From my window, I could see the empty, dusty outlines on the benches where my tools used to live. The room was a ghost town. Chloe came back inside, brushing her hands together. All done. Doesn't that feel better already? So much more potential in that space now. She handed me a piece of paper. It was a donation receipt from the charity. The description read, assorted household goods and old tools. The estimated value box had a number written in it. $25. I looked from the receipt to her smiling face. My voice was a dry whisper. What have you done? She patted my shoulder. I've helped you, Walter. You just need some time to see it. She left soon after, saying she had a house showing. I sat in the silent, hollow house, the $25 receipt trembling in my hand, staring at the open door of my empty workshop. The foundation of my world had just been dismantled and sold for scrap, and I had been right there, helpless, watching it happen. But what Chloe saw as a spring cleaning, and what I saw as a catastrophe, was about to become something else entirely. Because the true value of what she'd given away wasn't sentimental, it was financial, and it was about to be discovered by a complete stranger. The charity Chloe used was a local church thrift store. Their system was simple. Donations got sorted, priced, and put on the floor within 48 hours. My tools hit the sales floor on a Friday morning. A man named Leo was there. Leo wasn't a machinist, he was a picker. He scoured thrift stores, estate sales, and garage sales for anything he could flip online. He had a good eye for metal. That Friday, he was about to have the find of his lifetime. He told me later his heart actually skipped a beat when he saw the Gerstner chest. It was sitting on a low shelf, priced at $35. He knew that name. He'd seen them online. He opened the lid. Inside, it wasn't empty. Chloe's crew had dumped a random assortment of my hand tools into it. My favorite ball-peen hammers, a set of German-made parallel clamps, my Starrett tap and die set. It was a jumble, but to Leo, it was a goldmine jumble. He paid the $35 cash, carried the chest to his van like it was made of glass, and then went back inside. He found the canvas tool rolls priced at $5 each. He found the wooden crate with the Moore and Wright micrometers. Someone had marked it $10. He bought every single item from my workshop he could find. His total spend was $187. He loaded his van and drove home, his hands shaking on the wheel. That weekend, Leo started his research. He took photographs. He posted the Gerstner chest on a dedicated tool collectors forum. The response was instantaneous. "Is this number 217 from the 88 limited run?" one user asked. "Where did you find this?" demanded another. Offers started flooding his private messages. $2,000, then $2,500, then $3,000 for an empty box. That's when Leo knew he wasn't dealing with ordinary tools. He hired an online appraiser who specialized in industrial antiques. He sent detailed photos of the sign bar, the boring head, the micrometers. The appraiser's reply was a series of escalating questions, each more urgent than the last. Who owned these? Are there any maker's marks? Any documentation? Leo had none of that. All he had was the treasure and no map. Meanwhile, I was in hell. The physical pain from the knee was nothing compared to the psychic hemorrhage of that empty workshop. Jason finally answered his phone 2 days after the purge. His voice was thin with guilt. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I tried to stop her. She said it was already scheduled, that it was too late to cancel. She said you'd be angry at first, but you'd see it was for the best." "For the best?" My voice cracked. "Jason, she gave away my life. She gave away your inheritance. Do you have any concept of what was in that shop?" There was a long silence. "They were old tools, Dad. We can buy new ones when you're better." That sentence told me everything. He didn't get it. He would never get it. I demanded the name of the charity. I got it from Chloe, who gave it to me with a sigh, as if humoring a child. "It was for a good cause, Walter. Try to focus on that." I called the thrift store. A volunteer answered. I described the items, the oak tool chest, the metal boxes, the precision instruments. The woman was polite but unhelpful. "Oh, honey, we get so much in. It's probably already been sold. All sales are final." She couldn't tell me who bought it. She wouldn't. That was the first wall, the legal wall. Because they were my possessions, but once donated, they became the charity's property. And once sold, they belonged to the buyer. My property had legally flowed away from me, down a river of good intentions and gross negligence. I felt the first real, chilling wave of loss. This wasn't about getting angry. This was about something being gone. I turned to the internet. I joined the same tool forums Leo was using. I didn't have to search for long. Right there on the front page of the Machinist's Antiques board was a post titled, "Unbelievable Thrift Store Haul Gerstner and More." And there it was, a photograph of my chest, my tools spilled out on a rug I didn't recognize. My stomach dropped through the floor. I clicked on the user profile, Leo Vintage Finds. I read his post. He was asking for help identifying some weird custom pieces. He posted pictures. Picture number 4 was my sign bar. Picture number 7 was my boring head. The comments were a firestorm of collector excitement. "That's a one-off custom sign bar. Look at the craftsmanship. The boring head is incredible. I've never seen adjustments that fine. That's museum quality." And then the comment that made my blood run cold. A user named Micrometer Mike wrote, "Leo, you need to contact the Smithsonian. Seriously. The tool making on these custom pieces is at the level of a master like Walter Kessler. If these are Kessler pieces, you're looking at a haul worth 6 figures." Walter Kessler, my name, in a public forum under a picture of my stolen life. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely type. I created a new account. I private messaged Leo. "I need to speak with you urgently. The tools you posted are mine. They were donated without my permission. Please call me." I included my phone number. I stared at the screen for an hour. No response. I sent another message. "I am Walter Kessler. I made the sign bar and the boring head. I can describe every tool in that chest in detail, please." Nothing. The next morning I had a reply. It wasn't from Leo. It was from the forum administrator. My account had been suspended for harassment and attempting to circumvent a private sale. Leo had reported me. He thought I was a scammer trying to claim his incredible find. The wall had just gotten 10 feet higher, and it was made of other people's skepticism. Panic is a cold engine. It makes you think fast and act stupid. I called the police. A bored-sounding officer took my report. "So your daughter-in-law donated your property while you were incapacitated?" "Yes." "And you want to file a report for theft?" "Yes." "Sir, this sounds like a civil family matter. If she had access to the property and you didn't explicitly tell her not to donate it, it's going to be very hard to prove criminal intent." He took the information, but his tone said, "Don't expect a detective to knock on your door." The personal, legal, and digital doors were all slamming shut. I was trapped in my own house, surrounded by the absence of everything that mattered, watching my legacy be auctioned off in the court of public opinion to the highest bidder. Then the pivot, the thing that changed it from a sad story to a desperate race. A week after Leo's post, a new article appeared on a niche website called The Art of Toolmaking. The headline, "Lost Kessler Workshop Pieces Surface, Spark Collector Frenzy." Someone had connected the dots. The article named me. It described my career, my reputation among a small circle of precision tool aficionados. It quoted anonymous collectors saying a complete Kessler Workshop collection could auction for well over $150,000. The cat was out of the bag, and it was being chased by every tool collector with a checkbook. I got a phone call. It was from a number I didn't recognize with a New York area code. A calm, measured voice said, "Mr. Kessler, my name is David Chen. I represent a consortium of private collectors. We understand you may be the original owner of the tools recently acquired by a picker in Ohio. We are prepared to offer you a finder's fee of $20,000 for your assistance in authenticating the pieces and facilitating their sale to our group." I was stunned. They're not his to sell, they're mine. David Chen's voice remained smooth. "The current physical and legal possession rests with the individual who purchased them from a legitimate charity. We are offering to buy that possession. Your claim, while emotionally understandable, appears to have no legal pathway to recovery. $20,000 is a generous offer for information. It is also your best, and likely only, financial outcome from this situation." He was offering me a bribe to help legitimize the theft of my own property, to make it clean for the collectors. The shock curdled into a pure, cold fury. "Go to hell," I said and hung up. But David Chen had given me the final, crucial piece of information. This was no longer about a misunderstanding. This was a business transaction. My life's work was an asset in play, and powerful people with money were lining up to acquire it. Leo wasn't just a lucky picker anymore. He was a holding company for a $200,000 portfolio, and I was the inconvenient original owner standing in the way of a profitable sale. I had one card left to play. It was a nuclear option. It would fracture my family forever. But as I sat in the silence, looking at the online article with my name in it, looking at the empty workshop, I knew I had to play it. I called my attorney, Susan Park, the same one I'd used for Aliner's estate. I explained the situation, my voice trembling not with weakness but with a focused rage. I told her about the tools, the value, the donation, the online auction that was effectively happening in plain sight. She listened without interruption. Then she said 3 words, "We sue everyone." "Everyone?" I asked. "Everyone," she repeated. "We sue your daughter-in-law for conversion and trespass to chattels. We sue the charity for negligence in accepting and selling property that clearly belonged to someone other than the donor. And we file an injunction against this Leo character and any potential buyers, arguing the items are stolen property and cannot be legally sold. We create a legal cloud so thick over those tools that no collector will touch them with a 10-foot pole. It was brutal. It was public. It meant taking my son's wife to court. It meant legal bills that could eat up any potential recovery. But it was the only way to freeze the assets to stop the bleeding. I took a deep breath. "Do it," I said. The papers were drawn up. The lawsuit was a monster. It named Chloe, the Helping Hands Community Thrift, and one Leo Mitchell, his full name discovered through forum sleuthing, as defendants. The demanded relief was the return of all property or its full market value, estimated at $200,000 plus punitive damages. Susan served Chloe first. She did it at her real estate office in front of her colleagues and clients. Jason called me that evening. He wasn't weary anymore. He was furious. "How could you do this, Dad, to your own family over some stupid tools? You're destroying us." I tried to explain about the value, the collectors, the article. He shouted over me. "I don't care if they're worth $1 million. She was trying to help you. You're a bitter, selfish old man." The line went dead. The second wall, the family wall, had just solidified into concrete. The lawsuit hit the local court docket. And then the unthinkable happened. A reporter from the Dayton Daily News, always scouring court filings for stories, found it. Retired machinist sues family over DONATED tools worth $200K. The story ran online that evening. By the next morning, it was everywhere. Local TV news picked it up. A heartwarming gesture of help or a $200,000 mistake. The segment showed a file photo of a generic workshop. They quoted the lawsuit. They tried to contact Chloe and Jason, who gave a terse no comment. My quiet, painful, private catastrophe was now a public spectacle, a morality play about family, money, and the value of a lifetime of work. My phone began to ring with numbers I didn't recognize. Reporters, talk show producers, even another collector offering to buy the story rights. And through it all, the only thing I could think about was Leo. Where was he? What was he doing with my tools while this legal and media storm swirled? Was he hiding them? Was he quietly making a deal with David Chen's consortium despite the lawsuit? I got my answer in the worst way possible. A notification popped up on my phone from the forum even though I was banned. It was a Google alert for my name. I clicked it. It led to a new post on a high-end auction website. The Kessler Collection, Precision Toolmaking Masterworks. It was a preview page. The auction was scheduled for 1 month from today. The items were listed with pristine professional photographs. My sign bar, my boring head, my micrometers, my Gerstner chest. The estimated sale price for the lot, $180,000 to $220,000. Leo wasn't hiding. He was going big. He'd hired a professional auction house. He was using the media frenzy, the lawsuit, my name, all of it to drive up the price. He turned my tragedy into his marketing copy. The preview page even mentioned the ongoing legal dispute as a point of intrigue, a footnote that added drama to the provenance. The auction house was based in Chicago. They had a global clientele. Once that gavel fell, my tools would scatter to the four winds into private collections, possibly overseas, lost to me forever. The legal injunction was in motion, but these things take time. The auction was in 30 days. I had 1 month. 1 month to navigate a legal minefield, confront a son who now hated me, outmaneuver a ruthless picker, and stop a high-profile auction, all while learning to walk again. The race wasn't just on. The clock was screaming in my ear, and the finish line was the permanent loss of everything I'd ever built. The injunction was our first play. Susan filed it in federal court, arguing the tools were stolen property and their sale would cause me irreparable harm. It was a long shot, but it was the only lever we had to try and stop the auction clock. We got a hearing date in 10 days. 10 days of agony. My knee was healing, but slowly. The physical therapy was now a mechanical routine I performed through a haze of stress. The house felt like a prison. Reporters had staked out the end of the driveway for 2 days before losing interest. The digital world, however, was on fire. The auction preview page had thousands of views. Comment sections on news articles were brutal. Half called me a greedy old man destroying his family over metal. The other half called Chloe a monstrous fool. There was no winning. There was only the grim forward march of the lawsuit. Then the first counterpunch landed. It wasn't from Leo or the auction house. It was from Chloe's attorney. They filed a motion to dismiss my case against her. The argument was chilling in its simplicity. Chloe's lawyer claimed I had given her implied consent to manage my affairs during my medical recovery. That by accepting her help in the house, the meals, the groceries, I had created a caregiver relationship that extended to all my property. She was just tidying up, a well-intentioned act within the scope of that implied consent. The motion included an affidavit from Jason. In it, my son stated that I had never explicitly, in his presence, told Chloe she could not enter the workshop. He said I seemed confused and fatigued by my medication, and that Chloe was acting out of love and concern. Reading that affidavit was like being punched in the soul. Jason had chosen a side. He hadn't just stood by. He had actively weaponized my vulnerability against me. Susan was furious. "This is perjury adjacent, Walter. He's characterizing your mental state to create legal cover for her." But she warned me. Family testimony, especially about the mental capacity of an elderly post-surgical patient, carried immense weight with judges. It painted a picture: a confused old man, a helpful daughter-in-law, and a tragic misunderstanding. The hearing for the injunction arrived. It was a video conference. I sat at my kitchen table, dressed in a shirt I hadn't worn in months, my leg propped up. On the screen were little boxes for the judge, Susan, and the attorneys for Leo and the auction house. Chloe's attorney was there too. Leo himself was just a black square with his initials. The auction house lawyer spoke first. He was slick, corporate. He argued that his client was a good faith purchaser for value from Leo, who had himself purchased the items in good faith from a charity. He said the injunction was an attempt to drag a reputable business into a private family dispute. He said the alleged owner had waited too long to act, allowing the items to enter the stream of commerce. He called my lawsuit frivolous and retaliatory. Then Leo's lawyer, a local guy, chimed in. He played the sympathy card. "My client is a small business owner, Your Honor, a hard-working picker who made a lucky find. He followed all the rules. He paid cash. He has receipts. He is now being threatened with financial ruin because of a family argument he had no part in. Where is his justice?" Finally, Chloe's attorney added her layer. "This is a tragic family situation, Your Honor. My client was trying to help her frail father-in-law during a medical crisis. She made an error in judgment, but it was not a criminal act. To now tie up the lawful commerce of innocent third parties because of this private grief is an abuse of the court's process." I listened, my jaw clenched so tight it ached. I was the villain in every version of the story. The frail, confused burden, the vengeful patriarch, the abuser of the court. Then Susan spoke. Her voice was calm, precise, and sharp as a scalpel. "Your Honor, this is not about good faith. This is about the fundamental right to property. Walter Kessler did not donate his tools. He was never asked. He was incapacitated, in pain, and trapped in his bed while his property was removed. The daughter-in-law had no ownership to give. The charity had no right to sell. Every transaction that followed is tainted by that original wrongful act. The stream of commerce, Your Honor, is polluted at its source. To allow this auction to proceed is to say that if you are vulnerable enough and someone is bold enough, they can take what is yours, sell it, and you have no recourse. That is not the law." She paused. "We are not asking for a final judgment today. We are asking for a pause, a temporary restraining order to maintain the status quo until the underlying question of ownership can be decided at trial. My client deserves that chance. To do otherwise is to render his property rights meaningless. The judge, a woman with a tired but keen face, asked a few technical questions about the auction house's policies and the charity's intake procedures. Then she said she would rule by the end of the day. The screen went black. The waiting was worse than the hearing. At 4:17 that afternoon, Susan called. "We got it," she said, no triumph in her voice, just exhaustion. "The TRO is granted. The auction is paused for 14 days, but Walter, listen to me." The judge was skeptical. She said our case against the auction house and Leo is weak on the legal merits. She said the strongest part of our case is against Chloe. She all but told us to settle with the family and drop the rest. Settle? How do you settle for a lifetime of work? You don't, Susan said flatly. But the legal system doesn't see a lifetime. It sees disputed chattels with an estimated market value. Chloe's insurance company is already calling. They're offering a settlement to make her personal liability go away. The number when it came was insulting. $50,000, a quarter of the estimated value. The insurance adjuster said it was a generous offer given the circumstantial nature of the claim and the shared fault. Shared fault. My fault for being old and having surgery. I refused, immediately. I told Susan to tell them to go to hell. The principle was now a rampart I was willing to die on. But by refusing, I turned up the pressure on the only other front, my crumbling relationship with Jason. He came to the house that weekend. He didn't call first. He just walked in, his face a mask of cold anger. "They offered you $50,000, he said, not a question. And you said no. You're going to drag Chloe through a trial instead. For what? To prove a point." "It's not a point, Jason. It's $200,000 of my property that she threw in the trash." "It's money," he shouted, his control snapping. "It's just money, and you're choosing it over us, over your future grandchild." He was shaking. "Chloe is a wreck. She can't sleep. The real estate office is whispering about her. Our life is falling apart. And you have a check you could cash that would make it all stop, and you're telling me the money matters more." The chasm between us was now a canyon. He saw currency. I saw creation. We were speaking different languages. If I take that money, Jason, I am saying what she did was okay. I am putting a price on my own life's work and finding it cheap. I can't do that. He looked at me with something worse than anger. It was disappointment. The kind a son has for a father who has fundamentally failed him. "Then you've made your choice, Dad." He turned and left. The door didn't slam. It clicked shut, quiet and final. That was worse. The TRO froze the auction, but it didn't freeze the world. And in that frozen pause, the third player made his definitive move. Leo, the picker. He'd been quiet, letting the lawyers talk. Now he went to the media. He gave an interview to the same reporter who broke the story. It was a masterpiece of calculated PR. He presented himself as the little guy, the American dreamer. He talked about the thrill of the find. He showed the thrift store receipts. He said he felt terrible for Mr. Kessler, he really did, but he'd done everything by the book. He said the lawsuit was crushing him. He said he'd tried to reach out to me to work something out, but I'd rebuffed him. A lie, but a plausible one. Then, the masterstroke. He announced that if the court allowed the auction to proceed, he would donate 10% of the net proceeds to a charity supporting retired machinists. He was no longer a profiteer. He was a philanthropist trapped in a legal nightmare. Public opinion, fickle as ever, swung hard. The narrative became greedy old man versus generous finder. The comments turned vicious. My email inbox filled with hate. And then the hammer blow. The auction house, leveraging the public sentiment and the judge's skepticism, filed a motion of their own. They asked the court to force me to post a bond. They argued that by stopping the auction with the TRO, I was causing them financial damage, lost commissions, administrative costs, reputational harm. They demanded I put up a bond of $50,000 to cover their potential losses if I eventually lost the case. If I couldn't post the bond, the TRO would be lifted. The auction would go on. Susan explained it to me, her voice heavy. It's a squeeze play, Walter. They know you're a retired machinist on a fixed income. They know you don't have $50,000 in liquid cash lying around. They're calling your bluff. If you can't pay, the auction is back on and our leverage is gone. I was cornered. The legal path was closing. The family path was destroyed. The court of public opinion had convicted me. And now the auction house was demanding a ransom I couldn't pay to even keep the fight alive. I sat in the darkening kitchen, the silence pressing in. I had fought with every tool I had, legal, personal, moral, and I had lost at every turn. The auction was going to happen. My tools would be sold. I would be left with a shattered family and a moral victory that felt like ashes. But as I stared at the dusty outline of Alina's favorite vase on the mantel, a single, stubborn thought cut through the despair. I was a machinist. My entire career was about solving impossible problems, about making a plan when there was no clear path. I had looked at a chunk of metal and seen the finished piece inside. I had to look at this ruin and see the same thing. I couldn't fight them on their terms. Not in court, not in the media, not in a shouting match with my son. I had to change the game. The answer wasn't in a lawyer's folder or an insurance offer. It was in the one thing they had all forgotten about, the one thing that truly gave those tools their value. The work itself, my hands, my knowledge. I picked up the phone. I didn't call Susan. I called a number I had saved but never thought I'd use. It was for the editor of The Art of Toolmaking, the website that had first broken the story about the Kessler pieces. I had something to say, and this time I wasn't going to say it through a lawyer. I was going to tell my own story, not as a victim, not as a vengeful plaintiff, but as the craftsman who made them. I was going to show the world what they were really about to lose, and in doing so, I would make one final, desperate bid to win it all back. The editor's name was Martin. He listened, skeptical at first. Then I told him I wasn't calling to argue the legal case. I said, "You published an article about my tools, but you wrote about them as collectibles, as assets. You didn't write about what they are. Let me tell you what they are." 2 days later, a new article appeared. The headline was simple: "The man behind the metal, Walter Kessler on the soul of a tool." It wasn't an interview transcript. It was a first-person essay in my voice. Martin had been a good editor. He'd gotten out of the way. I wrote about the sign bar, not its auction estimate, but the 3 weeks I spent grinding the ceramic inserts by hand, listening to an Ohio State football game on the radio, the dust sparkling in a shaft of September light. I wrote about the boring head, how I designed it to solve a specific problem on a turbine housing for a power plant in Cincinnati, a job that had come in under budget and 3 days early because of that tool. I wrote about the Gerstner chest, how I'd saved for 8 months to buy it new in 1988, a reward to myself for getting my master machinist certification. How the first thing I'd put in it was the cheap calipers my father gave me when I was 16. I wrote not as a victim, but as a creator. I explained what precision meant, not just accuracy, but intention, the marriage of function and beauty in a well-made tool. I ended the piece with this: "They are not my children, but they are the work of my hands, and my hands are an extension of my mind, and my mind is all I have ever had to offer the world. To see them sold to the highest bidder feels less like a sale and more like an autopsy." The reaction was different this time, quiet but profound. The article was shared thousands of times, but not in the outrage circles. It was shared in engineering forums, in maker spaces, in trade school groups. The comments shifted. "This changes everything," one person wrote. "I was on Leo's side until I read this. You can't buy this story at auction." Another said, "This isn't about law anymore, it's about ethics." The pressure subtly changed direction. Leo's philanthropic 10% pledge now looked hollow, cynical. The auction house's motion for a bond looked like bullying, and Chloe's defense of implied consent looked like what it was: a legal shield for an ethical failure. 3 days after the article published, my phone rang. It was David Chen again, the collector's representative. His tone was no longer smooth, it was urgent. "Mr. Kessler, Your essay has complicated the situation. The consortium is reconsidering. The narrative is now attached to the pieces. A controversial narrative. It dampens the investment. I'm glad to hear it, I said, a flicker of grim satisfaction in my chest. Don't be glad, he said sharply. If the consortium withdraws, the auction price collapses. Leo panics. He may sell the pieces piecemeal to any buyer anywhere just to be rid of the headache. You'll never trace them. My offer still stands. $20,000 for your help in authenticating. We can still control this. He was right, and it terrified me. I'd rallied public sentiment, but I hadn't changed the legal reality. The TRO was expiring in 4 days. I didn't have the $50,000 bond. The auction would restart. And now, thanks to me, the value was unstable. It was a race to the bottom. Then the surprise. An email arrived, not from a lawyer, but from the general counsel of the auction house itself. It was addressed to Susan and me. It was a proposal for mediation. They wanted to sit down, all parties, before the TRO expired. They cited the shifting reputational landscape and a desire for an equitable resolution. Susan was stunned. They never do this. They fight. This is a sign of weakness. Your article scared them. A messy, public, ethically fraught auction is bad for business. They want this to go away cleanly. We agreed to mediate. The meeting was set for 2 days later in a conference room at a neutral law firm in Columbus. It would be me, Susan, Chloe and her attorney, Leo and his lawyer, and a representative from the auction house. A summit of warring parties. I walked into that room on my own 2 feet, no crutches, just a cane. The knee ached, but it held. It felt important to stand. The room was cold, quiet. Chloe would not look at me. Leo, a wiry man in his 40s, looked anxious out of his depth. The auction house rep, a woman named Amanda, was all polished calm. The mediator, a retired judge, laid out the ground rules. We were there to find a solution, not argue blame. He went around the table asking each party what they wanted. Chloe's attorney spoke first. Dismissal of all claims against my client with prejudice, a mutual non-disparagement agreement. Leo's lawyer was next. My client wants to be made whole. He has storage costs, legal fees, and the lost opportunity of the auction. He wants a settlement reflecting his investment and hardship. The auction house rep spoke softly. We want clarity of title. We want to either sell the items with clean provenance or be compensated for our costs and released from any liability. We want this dispute off our books. Then it was my turn. I looked at Chloe. She finally met my eyes. There was no anger there anymore, just a hollowed-out fear. I looked at Leo, who was just a man who'd gotten lucky and then caught in a tornado. I looked at the auction rep, whose job was to manage risk. I said, I want my tools back. A long silence. The mediator nodded. That is a clear position. Now how do we get there? What followed was 7 hours of brutal, granular negotiation. It was about money, but it was really about assigning a dollar value to pride, to grief, to catastrophic error. The auction house agreed to release the tools from their vault if all parties signed off on a settlement. Leo agreed to surrender them, but only if he was compensated for what he paid, plus a finder's fee. His original $187 investment had now ballooned into a demand for $15,000. Chloe's insurance company, through her attorney, offered to pay that fee, on the condition all claims against her were dropped. It was a deal taking shape. The insurance company pays Leo. Leo gives the tools to me. I drop the lawsuit against everyone. The auction house walks away free. On paper, it looked clean. I would get my tools back. Chloe would be shielded from financial ruin. Leo would make a profit. The auction house would avoid a messy fight. But it felt like a defeat. It meant no one was truly accountable. Chloe's insurance would pay, not her. Leo would profit from my loss. I would sign a paper saying I wouldn't speak ill of any of them. I would get my property back by agreeing to pretend the theft never happened. I asked for a break. I went into the hallway, leaning on my cane, staring at a generic painting of a sailboat. Susan followed me. "It's the best possible outcome, Walter," she said quietly. "You get the pieces back. That was your North Star. This is the only map that gets you there." "I know," I said. The weight of the compromise was immense, but the thought of those tools scattering to the winds was heavier. I thought of the signed bar in some private vault, never used, just owned. A trophy. It made me feel sick. We went back in. I agreed to the terms. The paperwork was a forest of legalese, but the core was simple. I signed away my right to sue. Chloe's insurance company cut a check to Leo. Leo signed a bill of sale transferring all rights to me. The auction house released the items from their custody. 2 days later, a secure courier delivered 2 large reinforced boxes to my house. I brought them into the empty workshop. My hands shook as I cut the tape. There was the Gerstner chest, the corner still damaged from its bump against the doorframe. There were the tool rolls, the micrometer case. I unpacked each piece, placing it back on its bench in its outline of dust. They were home, but they felt different. They were now also symbols of a brutal compromise. The joy of reunion was muted, bittersweet. The legal war was over. The family war was not. Jason and Chloe did not call. The silence from my son was a physical ache. The non-disparagement agreement meant I couldn't reach out to explain, to try and mend what was broken. The settlement had built a wall of silence. I tried to return to my routine. The knee got stronger. I could stand at the bench for an hour at a time. But the workshop was a museum of a battle, not a sanctuary. I'd look at a tool and remember the court hearing, or Leo's interview, or Jason's face full of hate. Then 8 weeks after the settlement, a letter arrived. Handwritten on simple stationery. It was from Jason. "Dad," it began, "I can't call. The lawyers say even that could violate the agreement, but I'm writing this because I need to. Chloe had the baby, a girl. They named her Eleanor." I sat down hard, the letter crumpling in my hand. Eleanor. He wrote that the birth had been hard, and in the fear and the chaos, something in Chloe had broken open. She'd sobbed, holding the baby, and said over and over, "What have I done? What have I done?" He wrote that becoming a parent had suddenly made him understand my perspective in a way no argument ever could. "I look at her tiny hands," he wrote, "and I think about the things she might make one day. And I finally understand that what I called just tools were the things your hands made. I'm so sorry, Dad. I failed you. I was supposed to protect you, and I protected everyone else instead." The letter wasn't asking for forgiveness. It was just a statement, a message in a bottle launched over a legal wall. It ended with, "Your granddaughter has your eyes. I hope one day you can see them." I cried. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, I sat in my quiet kitchen and wept for all of it. The loss, the fear, the stupidity, the fragile, desperate love that somehow survives even the worst mistakes. I didn't call, I wrote back, a short letter. I told him I loved him. I told him I was proud he was a father. I told him that holding a grudge was a heavier burden than any tool. I said that when they were ready, my door was open. No conditions. No discussion of the past, just coffee and meeting my granddaughter. It took another month. Then, on a Saturday morning in early fall, a car pulled into the driveway. I saw it from the kitchen window. Jason got out, then helped Chloe out, who was holding a bundle in a pink blanket. They stood there for a minute as if gathering courage. Then they walked to the door. I opened it before they could knock. We didn't speak. Jason's eyes were red. Chloe's face was pale, scared. She held out the bundle. "Walter," she whispered, "this is Eleanor." I took my granddaughter into my arms. She was so small, so warm. She opened her eyes, a deep, cloudy blue, my eyes. She yawned, a tiny, perfect gesture. We went inside. We sat in the living room. The conversation was halting, awkward, full of landmines we carefully avoided. We talked about the baby, about lack of sleep, about the weather. It was a start. As they were leaving, Chloe stopped at the door. She looked toward the workshop. "Walter, the tools, are they really back?" "They're back," I said. "Can I?" She hesitated. "Can I see them? I don't mean touch, I need to see what I almost destroyed." I led them to the workshop door. I turned on the light. The tools sat on their benches, orderly, silent. Chloe stood in the doorway, her hand over her mouth. She looked at the Gerstner chest, the gleaming sign bar, the rows of micrometers. She wasn't seeing scrap metal anymore. She was seeing what Jason now saw, a lifetime of creation. She didn't say anything. She just cried, quiet tears of shame and understanding. Jason put his arm around her. That was the true beginning of the repair. It was slow. It was fragile. There were no magic words, but there was a shared acknowledgement of a wound and a halting, mutual desire to heal it. One afternoon, a few months later, I was in the workshop, finally using the sign bar to true up a small block of aluminum for a simple project, a bookend for Jason's new house. The phone rang. It was Martin, the editor from The Art of Toolmaking. "Walter," he said, his voice excited, "I have a proposition. A museum in Cleveland, the Museum of Industry and Technology, read my article. They're starting a new wing on American craftsmanship. They want your tools, not to buy them, to display them on loan. As a curated collection, the Kessler Workshop, a life in precision. They insure them for full value, $200,000. They want you to consult to tell the story beside each piece." I was silent, the hum of the shop lights suddenly loud in my ears. "It's a way for the work to be seen," Martin said, "to be appreciated, to educate. It's a legacy, Walter, a real one." I looked around the workshop, at the tools that had caused so much pain, at the tools that were, ultimately, just extensions of myself. Keeping them here in the quiet dark felt like hoarding. Letting them be sold had felt like desecration. But this felt like a purpose. I said yes. The tools now live in Cleveland, behind glass, with little plaques that tell their stories. I go up there once a month, sometimes with Jason and little Alina, and I stand in front of the display and watch people's faces. They lean in, they point, they wonder at the craftsmanship. Kids press their noses to the glass. That matters more to me now than the quiet of my own workshop. I got my tools back, but in letting them go again on my own terms, I found something I thought I'd lost forever, the reason I made them in the first place: to be of use, to tell a story, to connect. The foundation, it turns out, can be repaired, not to be exactly as it was, but to be strong again in a new way. The cracks remain, but they're part of the structure now. They tell their own story, and sometimes that's the story worth telling. Walter Kessler's tools are now behind glass, safe, admired, and documented. But this story was never really about the tools. It was about the space between value and values. We live in a world that appraises everything. We put a number on heirlooms, on memories, on a lifetime of accumulated skill. We mistake that number for meaning. Chloe saw old metal. The auction house saw a lucrative lot. The collectors saw an asset. Walter saw his own mind made physical. The tragedy wasn't that these perspectives collided. It was that only one of them was almost erased. We often hear that they're just things, and in the grand sweep of a life, that's true. But things are also anchors. They tether us to who we were, to who we loved, to what we were capable of. To dismiss them is to dismiss a part of the person. Walter's fight wasn't materialism. It was a defense of his own identity when he was physically too weak to defend anything. The aftermath offers a messy, realistic blueprint for repair. There was no courtroom triumph where everyone apologized. There was a costly, bruising settlement. There was silence. Then there was a handwritten letter, a baby named after a lost grandmother, a door left open, and a daughter-in-law finally standing in the doorway, truly seeing what she had almost lost forever. The healing wasn't in the legal victory. It was in the fragile, chosen return to each other. The museum display is the perfect poetic end. It transforms the conflict. The tools are no longer a point of contention between a family. They are a point of connection for strangers. Their value is no longer trapped in a market or a lawsuit. It's released into the realm of education and inspiration. Walter didn't just get his tools back. He gave them a new purpose, and in doing so, found one for himself beyond the workshop walls. So what lingers after the story ends? A question. What are the precious, irreplaceable things in your life that someone else might see as clutter? Not just in your attic, but in your habits, your relationships, your hard-won wisdom. And who has the right to decide when you're too old, too vulnerable, or too outdated to be the caretaker of your own legacy? We all navigate these tensions, between helping and overstepping, between holding on and letting go, between the price something fetches and the worth it holds. Walter's story is a reminder that boundaries are not walls to keep people out, but lines drawn to protect what's inside. And sometimes, you have to fight for those lines, even when you can barely stand. Thank you for listening. If this story of craftsmanship, conflict, and quiet resolution resonated with you, consider subscribing for more documentaries that explore the real lives behind the headlines. There are countless other stories waiting to be told, of ordinary people facing extraordinary moments where everything they've built is put to the test. We'll see you in the next one.